Hello everyone, and welcome back to San Martin Theater in Buenos Aires. It's the finals of the 1971 candidates, Tigran, Vartanovich, Petrosian versus Bobby Fischer. Now, as you've seen in game 1, Petrosian played a really creative game with the black pieces. He completely chose a different style than the one he usually chooses. He didn't go into some passive defensive mode where he, simply tries to outlast his opponent, but rather he went on an all-out attack against Bobby Fischer. Fischer defended, and in the end, Petrosian was unable to reach move 40 to, gain more time to reach time control. He blundered and then he resigned before even reaching time control. So, game 1 against both Larsen and Taimanov were very feisty games. In the end, Fischer came on top, and such was the case in this match versus Petrosian. But now Fischer has the black pieces, and he has to face now Petrosian with the white pieces, obviously. Now, for some reason, Fischer was late for this game. Well, not much, some 3 minutes, but still, you don't want to be late to such an important game. And it's very interesting how this whole game turned out. Some of Fischer's other opponents, after losing a game, they would change their styles, and they didn't really want to repeat known opening lines and go a lot into theory against Fischer. But here we have a completely different case. So after losing a game, this is now how Petrosian treats the situation. So let's check it out. We do have a nice photo of the match. It's not from this game, since Fischer has a knight f6 and e6 on the board, well, in this game there will be a knight f6 and g6 on the board, but still a very nice photo, just to get in the mood. So let's check it out. Petrosian has the white pieces, and he opens with d4. Knight to f6 by Fischer, c4 and g6, so the king's Indian defense is on the board. Knight to c3, and now we have d5, transposing into the Gruenfeld defense. Bishop to f4, the Brinckmann attack, and now bishop to g7. Here we have e3, and here there's a known game between Petrosian and Korchnoi, which Petrosian won in 1961, so 10 years before this game was played, where Korchnoi continued by castling. But here Fischer chooses a different path. He goes c5. And okay, it's somewhat of a less known line, but Fischer will try to make it work. You'll see how it will turn out. We have d captures on c5, now queen to a5, pinning the knight on c3, we have rook to c1, and now knight to e4. Here Fischer creates a triple attack against the c3 knight with the knight, bishop, and the queen, and Petrosian simply plays c captures on d5, which is the strongest reply. Now, of course, you cannot capture with the bishop here. If you play bishop captures on c3 with check, you get b captures, and now if you capture with the knight, then you get queen to d2, and you lose a piece here. You can't move the knight, you can't defend it, and the queen is undefended on a5. So you would lose a piece here and the game. On the other hand, after this b captures on c3, if you play knight captures on c5, simply bishop to h6 is enough for white, because black has so many dark square weaknesses and he doesn't have a dark square bishop. Even though the material on the board is equal, white would have a much better game. Probably enough to win. So after c captures on d5, we have knight captures on c3 by Fischer. And now, of course, you cannot capture. If b captures, then bishop captures on c3. You have to move the king, and now, of course, black is better here. So after knight captures on c3, the only response from Petrosian is queen to d2, and this is the strongest reply. Now the knight is pinned, and you will only then recapture the piece. Since you can't move the knight, the queen is once again undefended on a5. Queen captures on a2, Fischer grabs a pawn, we have b captures on c3, and now, although you can capture the queen here, queen captures, king captures, you don't want to go into this. Okay, you do have a passed a pawn, but for example, after c4 and e4, Petrosian will have a massive central pawn structure, and white will be better here. So after b captures on c3, we have queen back to a5 by Fischer. Now comes bishop to c4, and here Fischer doesn't recapture material immediately. There's plenty of time for that. First he develops. We have knight to d7, and now comes knight to e2. And okay, knight to e5. Fischer goes after Petrosian's light square bishop. Bishop back to a2, and now bishop to f5. Fischer still continues developing pieces. There's always time to recapture pawns. Bishop captures on e5, bishop captures on e5, and now comes knight to d4. And okay, Fischer now recaptures the pawn, queen captures on c5, we have knight captures on f5, g captures on f5, and here Petrosian simply castles. He's not afraid of the semi-open g file Fischer has, but Fischer has some problems here. He can't really castle kingside, and of course castling queenside is no better, as both queenside and kingside are pretty much wide open. So he has a king stuck in the center, he has a doubled f pawn, and it will be very hard to deal with all of this. So okay, he goes queen back to a5. What do you do here? Petrosian plays queen to c2. He unpins, so now he can push c4, and also he's attacking the f5 pawn. Fischer pushes f4, and here Petrosian finds a very nice idea. He pushes c4. We have f captures on e3 by Fischer, and now Petrosian pushes c5. Again, creating a very nice pawn chain, well, a nice c and d pawn in the center. As you can see, these pawns are now controlling all of these squares, and he doesn't mind about, for example, e captures on f2. Simply queen captures, now your f7 pawn is under attack, and after you push f6, d6 will bust open the center, and white will break through. So after c5, we have queen to d2. Fischer offers a queen trade, and this would be okay for white. So Petrosian, of course, declines it. He goes queen to a4. This comes with check, and now you can't really go to d8. This would be, you know, a bit too much asking for trouble. After rook to d1, attacking the queen, for example, queen e2, now comes d6. And even pawn captures on f2, check is not a problem because rook captures and the queen is guarding the rook on d1. So here, whatever you play, white will simply break through, and it's all over. So after queen to a4, king to f8 by Fischer. We have rook c to d1, attacking the queen. And now we have queen to e2 by Fischer, and now comes d6. Petrosian is now threatening to break through. The threat is, of course, d captures on e7 with check, but also this opens up this very strong bishop's diagonal. So here, if Fischer is not careful, for example, if he pushes e6, then you get queen to h4 with a lot of ideas here. For example, queen can come to e7, and whatever you do, for example, if you try to develop the rook, with ideas that if queen comes, then king can escape, then even bishop captures on e6 will be an idea. Now, of course, you cannot capture because of queen to e7 checkmate. So, a very unpleasant position for Fischer. He tries queen to h5, and this is the correct idea. You can't allow queen to come to h4. Petrosian now, as Fischer is threatening checkmate on h2, Petrosian has to deal with this, and he finds a very interesting way of dealing with it. He pushes f4, which prevents checkmate, but it allows this pawn to e2 move. A nice exchange sacrifice by Petrosian, which allows him to continue his initiative. So okay, f captures on e5, we have e captures on d1 with check. Of course, Fischer brings another queen into the game, rook captures on d5, on d1, and now comes queen captures on e5. And here, okay, you could continue with something like d captures on e7, but black could actually perhaps hold this after queen captures. Let's say rook to f1, you threaten f7, black can simply continue developing, and if you give up the queen here for some remaining pieces, still Fischer would have two rooks against the queen, and Petrosian would really have to you know, work really hard to create some winning chances here. So okay, after queen to e5, Petrosian finds the best move, which is rook to f1, immediately threatening on f7. f6 is played, and now comes queen to b3 first, here with the threat of checkmate on f7. You have to prevent this. Trying to prevent this by giving up some material with e6 doesn't work in terms of queen captures on b7, threatening the rook. Also, queen can come to e7. So after rook to e8, you get c6, and now you can see that the pawns are simply too powerful. If queen captures, then of course rook captures on f6 will lead to checkmate after queen to f7. So okay, queen to b3, threatening checkmate, king to g7 is played. Fischer tries to run away with the king. Queen to f7 check, we have king to h6, and now comes the strongest move, the only good move in the position, d captures on e7, now removing the defender of the f6 pawn, and now rook captures on f6 is a terrible threat. Fischer pushes f5, but it doesn't really help him. Petrosian plays the rook captures on f5, we have queen to d4 check, and here on move 32, after Petrosian played king to h1, Fischer resigned the game. So there you have it. It's been since Palma de Mallorca last year, well, in 1970, so 10 months, almost 10 months have passed since Fischer last lost his game to Bent Larsen in Plama de Mallorca Interzonal, and here we have, after 20 consecutive victories, Tigran Petrosian manages to break Fischer's winning streak and now wins a game with the white pieces. So it's said, that's some of the one thing Isaac Kazhdan said about this event. He said that it's not Fischer's winning streak. It's not only over. It's smashed to smithereens. That's the meaning of the quote above the board. And also, it is said that the crowd of 1,200 people inside the San Martin Theater in Buenos Aires, and also 2,000 people outside in the lobby, chanted "Tigran, Tigran," which is why that is the title of this video. So yeah, a beautiful game by Tigran Petrosian, where he faces a less known line of the Gruenfeld, but he creates a masterpiece and wins this very nice game against Bobby Fischer. Fischer resigned, of course, because now there's really nothing to do. After one check, white will simply block, and after you go back, let's say queen g4, rook to f6 is coming, and now you're simply getting checkmated. For example, queen here, king goes back, rook h6, queen has to block, and now queen to g3 will be checkmate. So yeah, here you can see that although he did win his match against Taimanov 6-0 and also his match against Larsen 6-0, you can see that Tigran Petrosian is very much a different kind of opponent. So even though Petrosian lost game 1, he didn't bow down to Fischer and his amazing glory and all of his legend, but rather he stood up to him and played this beautiful masterpiece and won his game. So now the match simply continues. So there you have it, a beautiful masterpiece by Tigran Petrosian. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the Bobby Fischer series so far. I would like to thank Drew Jaguar, Scott Zonenborn, Nikola Dodushki, Julian Popov, and Christopher Fernandez for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, most likely with game number 3 of Fischer Petrosian. But also, I will try to check some of your suggestions, and maybe we'll have, something to break the series before game 3. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.